Well, we are going to continue this morning in the book of Nehemiah. If you're new to us this morning, or you've been out for a bit, I know it's summer, people on vacations, we are going to be preaching for the next few weeks on Nehemiah before we close. And today we continue in chapter 10. And I just want to do a little bit of the old previously in the book of Nehemiah, Law and Order style, because I want us to continue to understand, okay, reorient, where are we at? And basically the story is this: the people of God turned their backs on God. They broke their agreement to follow his ways and worship him alone. They actually refused his protection and his provision, which came through the agreement that they had with him. That's how the story begins. So one way of understanding this is it's like if I said to my children, hey, if you stay within the walls of our home, I can give you all you need and keep you safe. Respect us in what we tell you, and you will have all that you need and more. That's basically what this agreement. But the child says, no, I want more than the more you are providing. I want what I want. This harkens back to the Garden of Eden, where actually they were given literally everything except one tree, and they're like, no, we want that too. And this is what happens cyclically with the people of God. And this is a story not only of that happening, but of the redemption of that happening. Another picture of this is I was so bummed not to be with you guys last Sunday. Our flight was canceled because of the storms here. I called Pat and I was like, Pat, you got to host. He's like, I knew this was coming, because I was meant to host as Peter preached, and I was so disappointed. But as I was sitting in the airport, we're sitting there, and I was watching this 2-year-old just stare out at the plane in the airport through the window, and he was just mesmerized by it, and he was just fascinated, and he decided, I'm going to get on it. And so he bolts down the jetway onto the plane that was not his plane. I know, and I'm just watching this, and the parents are with another child, one of their other kids, and the dad notices out of the corner of the eye the 2-year-old bolting down the jetway, so he starts taking off toward the jetway. By the way, airports don't like it when you just bolt down the jetway of a plane that's not your own. But anyway, he grabbed the kid, scooped him up, and the kid just screamed bloody murder. He's like, but don't you know what I want? Don't you know how you're restricting my freedom? And the father lovingly just scooped him up and brought him back to where they were waiting for their plane. The irony is that kid was going to get on a plane pretty soon. Isn't that amazing? We just can't wait to have the thing. So we run away from the safety and protection. What he didn't realize is if he got on that plane and wound up in Toledo or wherever it was going without his family, he would be horrified, vulnerable, alone. This is the story of the people of God. Despite his good restrictions, they wanted to run after the things they wanted. And he chased after them lovingly and scooped them back. But here, he gives them over to their desires. God is a patient God, but actually, for our own good, he may give us over to those things we want that are not good for us, because they would not learn. So God says, okay, and removes his protection, his provision, and his blessing. Their city is destroyed and many are scattered. But Nehemiah brings them back and they rebuild the city. But more importantly, they recognize where they went wrong. That is where we're at. That was the confession of chapter 9. They realize this is what we've done. And then in chapter 10, they return to what God instructed them. That's what we're in now. Peter spoke about the return, the repentance of the people. And so we end that at the end of this chapter. And today we're going to finish that part with the last 8 verses of chapter 10. So I'm going to read that now. As they started making these commitments, as they began to return to God, they locked in all that they would now do. And they said this: we also take on ourselves the obligation to give yearly 1/3 part of a shekel for the service of the house of our God, for the showbread, the regular grain offering, the regular burnt offering, the Sabbaths, the new moons, the appointed feasts, the holy things, and the sin offerings to make atonement for Israel and for all the work of the house of our God. We, the priests, the Levites, and the people have likewise cast lots for the wood offering to bring it into the house of our God, according to our fathers' houses, at times appointed year by year, to burn on the altar of the Lord our God, as it is written in the law. We obligate ourselves to bring the first fruits of our ground and the first fruits of all fruit of every tree, year by year, to the house of the Lord, also to bring to the house of our God, to the priests who minister in the house of our God, the firstborn of our sons and of our cattle, as it is written in the law, and the firstborn of our herds and of our flocks, and to bring the first of our dough and our contributions, the fruit of every tree, the wine and the oil, to the priests, to the chambers of the house of our God, and to bring to the Levites the tithes from our ground, for it is the Levites who collect the tithes in all our towns where we labor. And the priest, son of Aaron, shall be with the Levites when the Levites receive the tithes, and the Levites shall bring up the tithe of the tithes to the house of our God, to the chambers of the storehouse. For the people of Israel and the sons of Levi shall bring the contribution of grain, wine, and oil to the chambers where the vessels of the sanctuary are, as well as the priests who minister and the gatekeepers and the singers. Read this last line with me. We will not neglect the house of our God. Do you realize how many times the house of our God is said there? That's my emphasis in bold. But isn't that beautiful? We will not neglect the house of our God. It's beautiful in part because they had been, right? They're turning here. And it's so sad because this was such a conviction. It was such a passion, such a way of life for them, and they abandoned it. Don't you wonder why? I wonder, I don't know about you, but I wonder why they went from such a passionate conviction as a people to commit themselves to these things, to then abandoning them entirely. I actually went back to that passionate conviction in Exodus 24. This is when they made the original agreement with God. They'd been delivered from slavery in Egypt. They were under terrible oppression in Egypt. He delivers them, and he's promising to them that he would make them his people and provide everything they needed and more. Exodus 24, I want to go back to it. He says, Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the rules, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Beautiful. That's the spark. That's the moment where all of this began. And when you see that moment, you're actually like, awesome, Israel. Like, great choice. You're doing it. They did the right thing. But now when you look through the lens of history from the vantage point of Nehemiah and so many other places in Scripture, you kind of get a pit in your stomach, don't you? Because you're like, well-intended, Israel, but you won't actually do all the words that the Lord has spoken. You won't actually receive the blessing that comes from that. You'll actually bolt in the other direction, like that little kid on the jetway, and you'll suffer for it. You will reject God. There they are. All the words the Lord has spoken, we will do. Actually, you will spit in his face and celebrate while doing it. Whew. That lands with me. Why is this book so important to us, Monument? Why is this book so important to us? Because we are them. We are them. We are that little boy running away from safety, running away from his loving parents, his loving father, and we are the people of God bolting in the other direction and suffering for it. Now, if you're a visitor here going, oh my gosh, what? Wait. What kind of church is this? Oh, I'm not saying this is Monument Church. I'm saying this is so embedded in our human nature, we must not forget that we have the same temptations and the same tendencies. We are the ones that, despite our best intentions, can spit in God's face and celebrate while doing it. Welcome to Monument Church. If you're a visitor, we'd love to invite you to lunch. I joke, but it's no laughing matter because we are them. And we can't pull out of it on our own. We have the passionate conviction, but our best laid plans will fail when we are left to our own devices. And this is why we're here. We don't come to church to feel good about ourselves and to get a pat on the back. We actually come to church to remind ourselves of what we can be without Him, who we are tempted to be when we turn our back on Him. Because actually those reminders will help us live the life that He intended for us. We need a reminder. We've made all the promises, we've prayed all the prayers, we've struck the deals with God and fallen down on our end of the bargain. So we need to give attention to this or it will take us down. So how do we learn what we desperately need to know so that we don't cyclically wind up in the very same circumstances? Oh, please listen. Please, I think God has something very acute for us this morning. I think He wants to cut, He wants to separate bone from marrow. I think He wants to get in. So first of all, why is the house of God so important? Like, what's the big deal, honestly? Isn't it just a building? I mean, even if it's a really important building, is it worth all of this? You see, God was addressing three key things here with His people. You may remember from these last couple of chapters: marriage and remaining distinct as a people through marriage. Observing the Sabbath. Do you remember that? That's what Peter spoke about last week. And then here, the temple, the house of God. And of all this reading the law and confessing and repenting, these are the highlights, or the lowlights, as it were. Israel here is giving attention to their lack of attention to the house of God. James Hamilton wrote a commentary, and he says this: what you live for is what gives meaning to everything else in your life. These old covenant Israelites are saying, we live for the Lord. That dictates who they marry. That dictates what their calendar looks like. That dictates that they care for the most sacred place in their society. We live for the Lord. So you see, the house of God was always meant to be the very epicenter of Jewish life. That's why this is important. Not just because of a cool religious building in the middle of town where they met one day a week. No. The house of God was where He dwelled. Can you imagine? There's a house in your city where God is? The house of God was not just a place or an address on a street in Jerusalem. It housed His very presence. It's where He was. It's where they met with Him. It's where they communed with Him and made their sacrifices, had their sins forgiven. It's where they were made whole. It was in the house of God. It was the greatest symbol of their identity as children of the living God who enjoyed an agreement with Him like nobody else had on earth. It was here in this house that was consummated. Everything was wrapped up in the house of the Lord. Their health and financial provision, their peace, their protection, their very lives emanated and returned to the house of God. Can you imagine how important this place was? The house of God meant that they were the only people on earth who had a direct line to God. Can you imagine? The creator of the entire universe, the cosmos, they had a direct line to Him, and that's where it all happened. In the house of God. This is where God met humanity, but not all of humanity, exclusively them, by the agreement He made with them because He chose them. Isn't that powerful? Now can you imagine? Side note, that's this now. I mean, David got this. David was so perplexed by the fact that they could even think about building a house for God. Listen to this. 1 Chronicles 20, 14 through 16, he says, "But who am I? And what is my people that we should be able to thus to offer willingly?" When talking about the house of God, he says, "For all things come from you, and of your own have we given you. For we are strangers before you and sojourners, as all our fathers were. Our days on earth are like a shadow, and there is no abiding. O Lord our God, all this abundance that we have provided for building you a house for your holy name comes from your hand and is all your own." I mean, this is so the opposite of proudly walking up and giving what little we might. It's just this thing of, it is all from you. Nothing we have belongs to us. It belongs to someone else. It belongs to him. And David knew that. Not only did he know that it was an incredible privilege to give what they had, he knew that the very means by which they could do it came from him. So the fact that the Israelites had withdrawn their support and neglected the house of God by keeping his money to themselves was shocking. But it wasn't the first time or the only time that it happened. It happens over and over and over and over and over and over. No amount of overs could describe how often this happened in their history. I want to just read you one other moment in Haggai. Chapter 1, verses 4 through 6 and 9. God says to his people, "Is it a time for you yourselves to dwell in your paneled houses?" Think fancy houses. "While this house, my house, the house of God, lies in ruins? Now therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. You have sown much, but harvested little. You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm. And he who earns wages does so to put them into a bag with holes. You looked for much, and behold, it came to little. And when you brought it home, I blew it away. Why, declares the Lord of hosts? Because of my house that lies in ruins, while each of you busies himself with his own house." Whew. You just feel the chill of that, don't you? But it's in his kindness that he's warning them. It's in his kindness that he's putting holes in their bags, that he's actually causing what they're doing to come to nothing so that they turn. At one point, it was their delight. The house of God was their everything. And the beauty of this Nehemiah moment is that they're renewing a commitment to do what God commanded, and they agreed in the first place. But there were consequences to neglecting it. He would not let them. And one way he ran after them in Haggai was to just blow everything away. So, okay, go with me. Given the importance of this, why did they stop doing it? Why? Why did they stop supporting, celebrating, honoring, and providing for the house of God? Why did they stop obligating themselves to all these wonderful things? Why did they stop bringing the first fruits and the firstborn and the first of our dough in our country? And why did they stop tithing? You know, it's interesting. Tithing is such a controversial thing, and I actually saw here that it was tithing plus the first of everything. That was interesting to me as well. For many of us, actually, 10% doesn't even, we don't feel it. I'll talk about tithing a little more in a moment, but I just noticed the first. It's one thing to give a portion, but what about the best of everything you have? Whew, that cuts close to the bone. We start to understand why they stopped. On one hand, I think the answer is simple. You'd be like, duh, Eric. They wanted to keep it for themselves, for other things. And I agree. Why give what you can keep? There is a great temptation to keep what you can give. I think that is the song of our culture. It's the song of human nature. I've asked Josh to write a song. Why give what you can keep? I'm kidding. That's a ridiculous song. We all know. We would not ever say, why give what you can keep, when in fact, it is often what is humming on the inside of us. Why give it away when I can keep it for myself? Let's bring this to our front door. Why would we keep things? Why would we not give, even as God instructs us to? Winston Churchill said this: we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. It's not just warm the cockles of your heart, but you're like, but I'm not sure I want to do it. The temptation is overwhelming for us. And that's why we need reminders. And interestingly, this passage isn't just about giving, it's about giving to the temple. We will not neglect the house of our God. It's about tithing, which again, like I said, it sparks all kinds of questions and controversy. And it's interesting, Celeste and I have been practicing Sabbath. Do you realize how much Sabbath shows up in the Bible? Like, I don't know why, in 30 years of following Jesus, I didn't realize how important Sabbath was. But it is like it is hitting me for the first time. And so as many of us have been doing Practicing the Way, we're practicing the Sabbath. We're actually being very disciplined about a 24-hour period in our week where we are delighting in Him, finding rest in Him, putting everything else aside. I mean, that was the whole point. And as I've had conversation with people, they're like, isn't this legalistic? And it can be, but actually, legalism is a greatly misunderstood thing. It really is. Listen to this. In Ezekiel 20:13, once again, as God is talking about what the problem is, He said they wouldn't obey my regulations, even though obedience would have given them life. Oh, and then here it is. They also violated my Sabbath days. It is everywhere. And I just thought, oh my gosh, Lord, you want me to rest. You wanted them to rest. You want me to rest. And this isn't legalism. And you might think, well, this is the New Testament. It's the age of grace. We don't need to do these things. But actually, Jesus didn't do away with the Ten Commandments. He fulfilled them. He did not do away with tithing. He fulfilled it. What does that mean? Well, let's drill a little bit deeper into that. Jesus said keeping the Sabbath is still good. You've just misapplied it. He also said the same thing about tithing in Matthew. I want to just read this little verse in Matthew 23. He says, "What sorrow awaits you, you teachers of religious law and you Pharisees, hypocrites, for you're careful to tithe even the tiniest income from your herb gardens, but you ignore the more important aspects of the law, justice, mercy, faith. You should tithe, yes, but do not neglect the more important things." He affirms this. And it's funny because people are like, well, does Jesus really want us to tithe? Do you remember Jesus? The angriest Jesus ever got was when He cleansed the temple. Why? He said, this is supposed to be a house of prayer and you've made it a den of thieves. Zeal for your house has consumed me. Do you think Jesus cares about the temple? Do you think Jesus being God and God's attention to the temple means that Jesus cared about the temple? Of course He did. Can you imagine? The debate goes something like this. Does He care about tithing? He gave everything. Jesus gave everything for the sake of it. Do you think He's hung up on 10%? He's having a totally different conversation. And we're like quibbling. I wonder, is it 9? Is it after taxes? It's everything now. Yes. Good news, bad news. It's everything. That's what we have in Him. He said tithing is good. Loving people and upholding proper relationship with others and God is better. They had turned tithing into the thing when it's just a thing, but it's a thing. Do you give? Do you care for the house of God? Or do you cry legalism as a way to wriggle out of the commands of Jesus? My next slide. It's a little long, it's a little wordy, but legalism has become a convenient excuse for not obeying God. Well, that's legalistic. His life-giving rules, regulations, statutes James Hamilton says this: the whole point of the Mosaic law and the temple was that these things enabled Israel to enjoy the presence of God. The rest, the temple, these commitments were not about legalistic obligations, nor is the covenant we enter into when we join a local church today legalistic. These commitments and obligations that we take upon ourselves are things we do to enjoy the good pleasure of our God. Good news, and this is where I want to round it out. You will not be punished as they would have been if you don't observe the Sabbath. Right? Many of you, me included for a very long time, I was never punished, as far as I know, for not observing the Sabbath. But I missed out on the opportunity to rest in Him, the permission to stop treading the hamster wheel. I mean, it's like, who doesn't want that? We have a discussion group in Practicing the Way, and we, kind of unpack these things. And many in our group, I think myself included in ways, are just like, the Sabbath is so cute. Definitely not doing it, but yeah, that's great. How could I possibly find the time? You will likewise not be punished if you don't tithe. I've known lots of people that don't tithe, never tithe, don't plan on tithing. I don't see them having been punished in this, their city destroyed. I haven't seen that. But actually, if we don't prioritize the house of God, we'll miss out on His mission, His call to engage our finances in what He's doing. But it's not just that. We don't just miss out. We're out of sync with the Spirit of God and what He's doing in the earth. That's the thing that I think we miss. Do I have to? Can I not? Oh, good, I'm free. No. This is what He's doing. And He's calling us to engage in it. He's saying, this is where my blessing and my protection and my provision, when you integrate with me and what I'm doing, that's where you'll find me. When we're out of step with the Spirit, it has grave implications for our lives. So why do we cling to our money? Why did they? Let's face it, we all do. I do. I'm just like, my wife is more generous than I am. So sometimes when we're trying to figure out if we want to give to something or what we want to give, she's always got a bigger number. But we've been married 24 years, so now I come with like an even bigger number. But I don't even really mean it because I'm just trying to beat her. No. But there's a clinging that's happening. There's just a little grip that I have. And I think it has to do with happiness. Or at least what we perceive to be the way to happiness. Ironically, what we think provides happiness is actually the road to unhappiness. That was the case for them. We think what we have or what we can get or keep will make us happy. We think what we have is actually the way, but it's not the way. We're attached to things and ideas that we believe will bring us happiness. Those who have been doing this course will recognize this quote that I thought was so powerful by Anthony DeMillo. He says this: if you look carefully, you'll see that there is one thing and only one thing that causes unhappiness. The name of that thing is attachment. What is an attachment? An emotional state of clinging caused by the belief that without some particular thing or some person, you cannot be happy. Beware of attachments. For many, our attachment is to money. Because an attachment to that will attach us to other things. So we believe I'm attached to a nice house, a nice car, nice vacations. I need to attach to money to attach to those things. Let's face it, our resting disposition, our human nature, the culture that surrounds us says, blessed are the rich. Doesn't it? Not blessed are the poor, as it says in Luke, or blessed are the poor in spirit, as it says in Matthew 5. It's hashtag blessed in front of like a nice car, a yacht, a house, whatever it is, a plane, luxury vacation. You don't see hashtag blessed in front of like a studio apartment with ramen on the table. But actually, that's what God considers wealth. He actually says if you're wealthy, and by the way, by some measure, we all are compared to the rest of the world, he says you're spiritually vulnerable. James says this. So be aware. Be aware of this, because the poor, actually, you can be glad, versus the rich. Actually, there is a certain humiliation spiritually. Nothing bad about being wealthy. It's just the spiritual vulnerability that James warns us about. The Israelites stopped letting their relationship with God determine how they managed their money. That's what it was. They just started doing whatever they wanted. Several times in the Bible it says this ominous phrase, and they did what they thought was right in their own eyes. And the consequences were predictable. John Mark Comer says the end of spiritual formation is detachment from the things of this world and attachment to God. Isn't that beautiful? If we can truly let go and truly lay hold of God, actually, whatever else we hold will compromise our hold on God. That's what he's calling them to. Return. Now, here's the crazy thing. As I said, this is cyclical. I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert. Travis is slated to end our Nehemiah series in a couple of weeks, so I don't want to steal his thunder. But for the sake of illustration, I want to tip the hand just a bit. I'd love to tell you that with all their heart and passion and commitment, they all lived happily ever after. But 3 chapters later, chapter 13, after Nehemiah had been away for a bit, he returns to find that these promises had been broken again. It says the portions of the Levites had not been given to them, and the house of God had been forsaken, and they violated the Sabbath. You're like, no, Israelites, you didn't. But it's all too predictable. And so Nehemiah, unsurprisingly, says this in verse 18, did not your fathers act in this way? And did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? What a morality tale this is, but it's more than that. It is more than that. It's don't you see the beauty of the house of the Lord, of his presence, and going all in on what he's doing? How soon they forgot, even with the best intentions, the strongest convictions, and the loudest proclamations, they drifted back into their selfish ways. Aren't you glad we have this story? Aren't you glad this can kind of grab us by the scruff of our neck? Because the cycle continued. How soon they forgot and how soon we forget. Maybe you're here today and with great conviction, passion, even proclamation, you took a stand to live according to God's commands. Maybe that's you today. Maybe you've even shed attachments to earthly things for attachment to God, only to return to those attachments as the Israelites did here. Oh man, the road is long and temptation is everywhere. And all of us do it. No one goes, yep, I'm doing this, and we never look back. We actually drift. If you're here today, he just wants to get your attention. He just wants you to stop running down the jetway and come back. There's danger that direction. He's waiting here in his house. He wants to scoop you up with his arms, not scold you. Amazingly, that father did not yell at his 2-year-old. He grabbed hold of him. He's like, I'm so glad you are now with me and not on that plane, because I want you here with me. Look, I'd love to say it's not about money, but it actually is. This passage actually is, but it's even more. It's about our heart and our disposition in everything we do. It's about money and time and relationships and living his way in all of these things. He's calling you back. He's calling you back. Maybe it's 9 out of 10, you're good, but actually this one area, he's just going, come back. Whatever that may be. Whatever beautiful, life-giving statutes that he has provided for us to live in the safety and provision of. He wants you back. I actually, this morning during worship, I thought those words that came were so important because Jesus was at the center of that "let me see Jesus," and just the idea that He is the one with great power that keeps them safe in the storm. He is the one with a gentle hand that just lets you know He is there. He is the one where we find life. Wherever you are, I want to be. I read this psalm this morning, Psalm 23, one verse, and it says, "Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life." That's the Father running down the jetway. And then it ends with this, "And I will live in the house of the Lord forever." Goodness and mercy, that's His job. Dwell in the house of the Lord forever, that's ours. I'd never seen it like that before. As we were in worship, and those words were coming, I had a very strange sense, and if I can risk a little bit here, I believe there are people that come every morning that don't know what they're doing here. So to say, you're here and you don't know what you're doing here, that's low-hanging fruit. But I felt specifically for a man that you came here today going, what am I doing here? I didn't want to come, and this offers me nothing. I even felt that I had a name of who that is. And I could be very wrong, so please forgive me. And if it's not true, nobody dies, all right? I'm stepping out a little bit on this, but someone with the name of Brian, not Brian Kimberly, not Brian Goulet, a Brian I don't know. Is that you? I'd love to talk with you. But whether or not he's here, we're here, and he's wanting to get our attention. Because the house of God is where his life is. The people of God. I was so bummed to miss last Sunday because I just want to be in the house of the Lord forever. Not Waters Landing Elementary. Trust me. But with his people, in his presence, and his provision, and his protection. This is where he lives.